It's my privilege to call this meeting to order shortly after 7 o'clock p.m. Why don't we first take a roll call, though I'm going to suggest in the future that we just say the minutes reflect the committee members who are in attendance, or can we just do that? I see nodding heads. So the minutes will reflect the committee members that are in attendance. Just real quickly, I want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you so much for showing up for yet another meeting, because all of us were looking for another meeting in our lives. We appreciate particularly staff from both the village as well as the library for being here. You certainly did not need another meeting in your lives, but thank you very much for being here in support of this pursuit. And thank you to everyone who is at home watching this or watching it later on the recorded channel. So following our agenda, and if you don't have a copy of the agenda, there are copies over on the side of there. Please pick them up and follow along. We're going to try to be concise and effective tonight, but most importantly, get things rolling. So we'll start with item 3, which is introduction of the committee members. I will say that I'm very happy and pleased to be serving with my fellow committee members in this task. Thank you for taking the time out of your lives and away from your families to do so. Why don't we start with a brief introduction, give everybody an opportunity to say hello, and if you want to say something, you certainly can. I will save myself for last. Ronaldi, you want to go first?
Yeah,
unless Nathan really wants to go first.
Nathan wants to go first. Go.
By the way, we're going to follow Robert's Rules of Order, but we're going to try to keep this informal and conversational and have a dialogue and a discussion and accomplish what we've been tasked to do. So we can adjust to the fly.
all right. I'm Nathan Williams. I'm a member of the Library Board of Trustees since late last year, and now a member of this ad hoc committee. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm glad that everyone's here and that you've sprung forward. This is going on while the EQ Downers Grove event, One Book, One Town is going on. So hopefully you go to that after this ends. Perhaps it would be apt to call this event One Library, One Town. I have some opening comments, and I'll read them. The Library Board of Trustees is accountable to the Village Council through the current appointment process, as well as the removal process, and indirectly to the public. We serve the library as an institution, and the public as fiduciaries. We take that role seriously. My opening remarks cover 4 subjects: the context, the audience, the evaluation process, and the scope of work. So I'll start with part 1. What is the context for the creation of the ad hoc committee? How did we get here? The Library Board of Trustees principally agreed to participate in this ad hoc committee to avoid the negative effects of a hastily proposed and poorly worded village referendum. We believe it is imperative to assess the status quo in a neutral, measured, and methodical way. The Village Council does not have authority to implement a non-binding referendum, even if it passes. Only the Library Boards of Trustees can do that under current law. Further, we could change to a district library without a village referendum if that turns out to be in the best interest of the community. However, that would require negotiation between the village and the library. That's the context. We move on to the part 2. Who is the audience for this work? The work of the ad hoc committee of the council has 3 audiences. The village council, which will decide whether to bring a non-binding referendum in 2026. The public, who elects the council members, including 3 open seats in this year's April 1st election. And the Library Board of Trustees, which has sole authority over to whether to make changes to our governance structure, and in turn has authority over to whether to make changes to the trustee selection process. All 3 audiences must believe the fact-finding process is sound and objective for this committee's report to guide future decision-making of the Library Board of Trustees. That's what we're working towards this evening. To be sound, we must explore the practicality of all governance structures, including modifying the current appointment process. To be objective, this process must be grounded in impartial research. Part 3, 4-act play. Looking forward, how should we evaluate a potential change in the governance structure? Eventually, after a sound and objective investigation, the Library Board of Trustees may be asked to consider a potential change to the current governance structure. I will support a potential change if it meets 2 criteria. First, the change must be pragmatic. Something is not practical merely because it's feasible or possible. Something is practical if it can be efficiently and effectively implemented under our governmental authority. Second, the change must adhere to the principle of minimalism. That means the change must be narrowly tailored to achieve an important governmental objective. To analyze this element, we must identify and agree upon the problem that needs to be addressed and determine whether there are ways to address the problem that are easier to implement, less disruptive, and less costly. This is critical to government efficiency, which is a goal that everyone shares. To be clear, if an alternative method of selecting library trustees is not both pragmatic and minimalistic, then I will not support that course of action. We move on to part 4. And here we'll return to the present moment. What are the constraints on the scope of the committee's work? As the council knows, the Library Board of Trustees strongly disagrees with the Village Council resolution creating the ad hoc committee. Most notably, the resolution's whereas clauses do not comprehensively reflect the context that occurred over the past few months, leading to the creation of the committee. The Library Board of Trustees will likely address the council's omission through our own referendum for the sake of the historical record.
Resolution.
Sorry, thank you. Finally, this ad hoc committee is not a joint committee. It is a village committee created under the council's legal authority, with the committee scope set forth in the council's resolution. That scope is contrary to the input the Library Board of Trustees offered at our January and February joint meetings. Tonight, we will discuss the research process, whether to hire an expert, and the general content of the summary report. However, each of those things is constrained by the choices the council has already made. Thank you, that's all for now.
Hi, I'm Bernali Quintia. I've been a library trustee since 2019. I want to first start by thanking Village Council for correcting the situation with my term. I did not want to move forward, as I spoke to Commissioner Tully, without sort of getting that resolved, because I did not want any other distractions from the work that we're doing here, and I wanted to make sure that the work that we do is legitimized by my term not being an issue at all. I think Trustee Williams sort of covered how the library trustees are feeling, so I'm not going to repeat anything that he said. I want to acknowledge the staff of both the village and Addershall Public Library. I know that we all have our plates very full right now, and this is just another thing that you're doing, and it feels like another thing that we're doing. As many of you know, the library trustees have a strategic plan that's going on, and we also are now going to start soon the process of finding a new director. And so that is something that will take up a lot of our time, as it should. So I am interested to learn more, and I am excited that I'm getting to sit with these 4 people, because I think they are smart and passionate about our community, which I also am. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
I'm Commissioner Leslie Sadowski-Fugit. Obviously, I'm the Village Council since 2019. I am also very happy to be here. I'm sure as many who have watched the videos know, I was not in favor of the referendum, but I also am somebody who does not want to continue to discuss the past, but we are here right now. And I am going to try to be as impartial as I can, as a human being, of course. Really work as hard as I can with these three members here, which I am also very happy to be with my colleagues here, and do the best fact finding that we can to bring back to our respective boards and to the community so that we can do right by our residents and be as responsive as we can to the community. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And good evening, everyone. My name is Martin Tully. I currently serve as a member of the Downers Grove Village Council and have been asked, like all four of us, to serve in this role. I don't think any of us were looking for this position. I don't think any of us ran for this position. We were all asked to serve in this capacity, and as far as I know, each one of us voluntarily said so. So that's why we're here. A few things that I would like to say is first of all, I appreciate the fact that we are here. I am disappointed that there's some difference of opinion as to why we're here, how we got here, but I'm glad we're here because, as I'll explain in a moment, I don't think this is about a problem to be solved. I think it's about a question to be answered. And I think it's a good, healthy exercise to have the conversations that could potentially answer the question. So I won't comment on how we got here. I'm hoping that as get all my titles straight. I was going to call you Commissioner Sadowski if you're good. Said that we focus on the task at hand. We're here by our own volition, that we work towards a goal of getting information out to the community so the community can have the time and the information necessary to make its own decision. In that regard, my recollection of the discussions that were happening last fall about a potential referendum where there were a lot of very strong opinions about it, but for the most part, there were people who were interested in learning more, but wanted more time and more information. Two fair things to ask for. So I view this very much as trying to satisfy that request of providing more time and more information. And if there's something down the road, that will be because there's time and information and not something else. The other thing that in my mind, at the end of the day, ultimately there's one audience, and that's the residents of Village of Downers Grove, because we have an organization chart. I'm sure the library has something very similar in the village, and it has the staff reporting to the manager and the manager reporting to the council. But there's a box that's above all that, and it's the people of Downers Grove. So ultimately, whatever the people of Downers Grove want, I imagine both the village council and the library board of trustees would ultimately defer to. I hope that's the case anyway. I also feel very strongly that we shouldn't prejudge anything. I'm certainly coming into this with an open mind. I'm not prepared to say what I want to see or what I don't want to see. I'm not prepared to say that if X then Y divided by 7. I'm very much in the viewpoint of let's find out what we can find out. One of my colleagues said to me up here at one point in time, I hope that the members of the council, or I hope that the members of the committee don't only come to the committee with what they already know, but instead strive to learn what they don't know. And perhaps it may change their view or it may confirm their view. I think it's important to keep an open mind, think things through. My thinking and my views on this whole topic have evolved over time. I think that may be true of many people. And I'm hoping that with more information and discussion, everyone's thinking will evolve or at least come to a place where we can reach some consensus. Which is my next point, and I've said this both at village council meetings and at our joint meetings that we held at Herrick, is I think it's important that we engage in a discussion and a dialogue and reach a consensus, at least in terms of what the report will say. The report isn't going to make a recommendation one way or the other. It's going to address the tasks that are put before us. But I hope, and I truly hope, that we achieve our objective through dialogue and not debate. I can go into a long discussion of the difference between dialogue and debate. The debate is about one person trying to prove that they're right and the other person's wrong. The dialogue is about respecting other views and accepting that other people have other views and trying to understand where they're coming from and perhaps even moving the needle towards your own thinking of things. I've been involved in many organizations that do that very effectively, notwithstanding very, very, very different, strongly held views from the get-go. So I'm very hopeful that that could be a guiding principle for this committee. I said something a moment ago about, and actually, Trustee Kuntia, you asked this question, I think appropriately, at one of our joint meetings, is what is the problem we're trying to solve? And my thinking has evolved in terms of, I don't view this, I don't think it's properly framed as a problem to be solved. Because the minute you say there's a problem to be solved, people rightfully get a little defensive. There's a problem to be solved, then there's a problem in the first place. My thinking is on this has evolved into, instead, there's a question to be answered. And I think that that question can be asked without suggesting that there is a problem necessarily. I'll give you a couple examples in village history. I think it was maybe 1999. I may not have my dates right, but it was around that time when or maybe it actually happened in 2001. But there was a question back then, the village council was made up of 5 members, not 7. And the question was asked whether the village should expand the village council from 5 to 7. It could have stayed at 5, it could expand to 7. There were reasons for that expansion, there were reasons to keep it the way it was. And then ultimately there was a referendum that was held about whether to expand the council, and the public voted yes and expanded from 5 to 7. And the first election I think took place with a 7-member council was in 2001. The important thing there to remember is that when the question was asked in the late 90s and early 2000s to whether to expand the size of the village council from 5 to 7, no one was saying that the current council was not doing its job. No one was saying that the current council was ineffective. No one was saying that the current council was doing a poor job of running the village. It was a question as to whether 5 or 7 would be better, and that issue was brought up and the community considered it. Another example in recent history was, and although some people would say this addresses a problem, but bear with me. The other more recent example was when the village council took up the issue of term limits. People have very strong views on term limits. Some people think they're necessary, some people think they're counterproductive. And ultimately that went to referendum 2, and the community made a decision in a non-binding way in that particular case. But I'm also struck by the fact that there wasn't necessarily any, while people may have felt strongly about term limits one way or the other, there was no suggestion that the current members of the council back when that was taken up were doing a poor job, or that the village was being run poorly. It was a question to be answered. So I just thought it important to address that question that you had asked, and others have asked, that at least as my thinking has evolved, this is not about a problem to be solved, but a question to be answered. And I think we have those questions fairly put to us, and hopefully we can, to borrow the words of one of my colleagues in the village council, we can explore what's possible. So that's my comment. I mentioned to others that we hopefully won't be here for a long time tonight, but we really want to get things rolling. But I did want to give everyone an opportunity to make their comments. So we are now on item 4 of the agenda for tonight, which is what is the charter or role of the committee? I think that is pretty self-evident. Our charter is as set forth in the resolution 2025-21, which provides what is the scope of our purpose here. Section 3 in particular identifies what the general purpose and duty of the committee shall be. It's broken up into primarily, well, if you take apart the, well, we're going to address all of them, so I want to just back up a minute. First 2 are to review and research alternative methods for the selection of library board of trustee members. Number 2 is to seek and consider appropriate expert information. And then 3, these are the active things, to submit to the village council and the library board of trustees no later than September 30th, 2025, a report summarizing the attributes, or the word I prefer is actually qualities, of an elected library board selection process, an appointed library board selection process, and any other alternative selection process. And then we'll come to item 4 later on our agenda, which is our meeting schedule, our cadence, and the definition of our quorum. So with that, I already jumped to item 5 on the agenda, which I think is really the meat of it. So I'm going to suggest that we take up those two items in terms of how we fulfill our tasks of reviewing and researching alternative methods for selection of library board of trustee members. There's been a fair amount of information that has been shared over the last 6 months, most of it informal. But I would open it up to the committee to answer the question of how can we take advantage of low-hanging fruit? What information is already available, understanding that we have the ability to go get more information, including expert information. What is the ability to gather some existing information that we already have to at least get things started? Because just for my 2 cents, while I think getting some outside input would be very, very valuable, it's sort of like, well, let's figure out what I can already know and then go to an expert, at least understand what we already know. And I think that will also help frame what request we make of any outside party, but would be interested in your thoughts.
I've been thinking a little bit about it, and we certainly already do have a little bit of that information, although it's kind of been, I feel like it's been trickling in a little bit as we go. So for example, as we've been going through this with the referendum from the council perspective, we learned a few meetings into the conversation that because we are a commission form of government, that's the reason why we can't have the elected board similar to some of our neighbors, like Westmont, for example. And so I think a very early step should be kind of compiling all of that information that we have determined to be true kind of into one document, and to figure out who is it within our organizations that have figured those things out and what is it that we have already. Beyond that, I think we will have to figure out what our staff capacity is, because again, I'm not sure where it is, knowing that we're working on our comprehensive planning, and now the Library Board of Trustees is going to be working on hiring a new director, which we did not know at the time when we were trying to figure this out. And so I keep going back and forth of the best use of time for everyone. Is it the best use of time for our staff to work hard to figure out some of the low-hanging fruit, and that would potentially be something that an expert that we hire could do in 10 minutes? Or should we just potentially hire somebody right off the bat? So this is something that I feel like would be worth a kind of a back and forth conversation for all of us. It's something that I've been going back and forth in my head about. But I think the first step in my mind would be to compile everything that we actually do already know and have those conversations with the staff who are doing that work to figure out where that capacity lies, and then kind of move on from there. Those are my first thoughts.
I think my first thoughts are very similar to yours. You know, there are certain questions that, and I'm just gonna say names, Julian and Dave would know, just because they know, or Enza would know, that we could maybe compile into one document, things like the types of government, Christian government. But I also strongly believe in working smarter instead of harder, which is why I think hiring an expert who this is their field, that they are knowledgeable and they already know what questions, we might not even know what we're trying to ask. I just think it's in interest of not sort of not twiddling our thumbs, but going in circles. And if there's someone who knows the answers, then why would we just find that person and use them? There's low-hanging fruit, like you said, but then there's also being efficient.
I have thoughts on whether to hire an expert, but I also have a few questions on how I should interpret resolution section 3.1. And that's related to the alternative methods of selecting trustees and sort of the research process and what the scope of the research is. Just wanted to confirm that we're looking at the pros and cons of both the election process, that could be feasible, various methods of getting there, and the current appointment process. Is that true?
That's my understanding.
I think it's ambiguous. It depends what you mean by alternative. Alternative to, the current status quo, or by either A or B.
Let me pause there and say that if we get, I don't think we're there, but if we get to a point where this committee thinks we need guidance, We do have the ability to ask the village council to give permission to perform additional duties or tasks. I don't think this rises to that level. But I will give you my own answer, Nathan, is that what I look at summarizing attributes of or qualities of an elected board selection process. So one is just an elected board process, of which there are multiple flavors.
Yeah,
Number two, an appointed library board selection process, of which there are multiple flavors. And then alternative selection process, I think, is sort of the open, that goes to the what's possible, at least in my mind.
Okay, so we would be evaluating the pros and cons of both the elected process and the appointment
Yes.
process. Because I don't understand 3.3 if that's not the case.
Well, 3 just is the outcome.
No, but I mean, it says elected and the attributes of an elected process, and then 2 is an appointed process, so it seems like it's both. So it is both.
Agreed.
Okay. So I know this was a point of contention because some people thought that it might be ceding power to this committee. But I think we have to consider what would be the effect of a modified appointment process. For example, and this is not saying we need to get into the criteria for how you select trustees or how the sort of framework for removing someone. I'm not saying that at all. But if, say, one of the pros of either appointment or election is accountability, then having an understanding that you could improve the removal process to make it more objective would be a way of thinking about accountability. So if there's a con associated with the current appointment process, that may be a non-factor if you modify the appointment process. And I think we just need to acknowledge that when we're developing pros and cons. That if there are certain cons associated with your current appointment process, I'm not telling you how you could change it or you should change it. I'm not trying to take power from you. It'd be totally inappropriate for me because I'm subject to those rules. But at the same time, I think it's something you can change. And so when we're sort of balancing these pros and cons and sort of presenting them to other people, it would be misleading to present them as if they were static things.
I think I follow you.
Yeah.
I think you're gonna like where I follow you because I think what you said, if I did understand you correctly, is that we're looking at the pros and cons or the qualities, attributes, qualities, are synonyms, of an appointed library board. One could say that one of the, depending on your viewpoint, one of the pros or one of the cons could be the removal.
Right,
So
exactly.
I think that's within scope.
Yes.
But or even like the appointment process, I've heard from the community that there's a lack of transparency around it, that there should be more public input in it. Obviously, you could change that appointment process to make it more transparent or to provide more public input, to take a vote in public, rather than sort of do everything in executive session and then just announce it to the public. I think that would be somewhat responsive to the community concerns that I've heard. And so if you're gonna say one of the cons of the current process is that people don't really understand how I get to be here, then I would say that that's sort of something that the council could deal with outside of radical change to elections.
I will say though that I follow you this far. I think initially our focus should be on the what and not the how.
This is just how the report will ultimately be framed, that anything that is within the appointment context, and there's pros and cons, that particularly the cons, if there are things that could be addressed by the council through more narrowly tailored means, which was sort of my standard, that should just be acknowledged in our report. It doesn't mean that the council has to act upon it. You obviously have lots of different appointments that you make. And I understand the concern that if you're changing it for the library as sort of a carve out, that would maybe be problematic. And you have other commissions that you're appointing people to. So I get that. So I'm not trying to guide the direction. I'm just trying to get a impartial, balanced final report. Okay.
Understood. My only comment is baby steps. I think we're at the very beginning. I think you're raising good points that when we get further down the road, as to what the report will reflect, I think those are all fair questions.
Okay, but we have, I think some of the resolution is ambiguous, and so I'm just trying to get some clarification, because obviously I have nothing to do with the resolution.
We have the ability to get clarification. I think there's plenty of us to get started on, and by the way, I'm the expert, even if we recommend that we try to identify someone, and frankly, there might be somebody already easily identified who may have already written something who we can get a copy of before we have to hire anybody. That was kind of a low-hanging fruit that I'm thinking of. But I think the process of finding that person and engaging them will take some time, even if it's 2 or 3 weeks,
Sure.
which is probably ambitious.
Yes, so
We can gather information in the interim.
So that timeframe, I think, makes a lot of sense. If we spend 2-3 weeks with staff doing research, consolidating what we already know,
Yeah.
all that makes sense. I think, within those 2-3 weeks, there is an election. So I would like some level of commitment that regardless of the outcome of that election, that we will seriously consider hiring an expert. And in fact, the library board has found an expert. So I have communicated with the Northwestern University law professor. Matt also communicated with this person. His name is Nadav Shofet, and he's working on a law review article on this issue. He's willing to consult with us at a nominal cost. He acknowledges there's not a lot of empirical data. For some reason, law professors, poli-sci professors, and economists are more interested in the federal level than they are in local politics. I just don't understand it, and he doesn't either. But that is why he's taken this up as a subject matter. And so he could be hired.
Do you know when the article's gonna be published?
I don't, and maybe it's already, like a preliminary draft is already on the web. I would have some concerns about us characterizing his law review article. I think that's a bit like Bill Barr characterizing the Mueller report, personally. But I think expert advice ensures efficiency of research, we'll talk about that, objectivity free from potential biases, and accuracy of findings. And while I don't think we have to hire an expert next 3 weeks, I do think it's a good idea to hire an expert. I think it gives credibility to this process from public optics.
I don't think you're getting any pushback on that. In fact, I read,
Okay, yeah, I'm
I
not
read
trying to be
section-
confrontational, this is my viewpoint.
I appreciate that. I read section 3.2 as seek and consider appropriate extra information.
And I watched the council meeting, I mean, I understood there's like a discretionary, and that you'll go back to the council, and, you know, and that's all appropriate. So I understand it can't be today that we make that decision, but, you know, I'm just frankly stating my view from the outset.
Except you're on the inside now. No, I don't think there's any disagreement that that's something that we should explore, and I'm certain that there's appropriate expert advice that we can get. All I was saying is, I think I'm hearing that there is a lot of information, the village has gathered information, the libraries have gathered information. I think getting that in one place and saying, yes, here's what we've already collected. Actually, I was amazed at how fast people were able to generate pages and pages of information on this topic within a very short period of time last fall. I would love to have all that in one place for our benefit. I think the community would benefit from that, because the other role that we serve is kind of a repository for information on this topic for residents to look at.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
So I understand that Commissioner Gilmartin asked a variety of questions from the early days of all this in around Thanksgiving. And I don't recall, but were any of those conversations and those answers privileged? I think you narrowed it to certain answers and posted some of those answers. But if we're consolidating all of the information from both sides, I know, for example, we've sought legal advice. I'm just wondering to what extent that actually can be shared amongst all of us and to the community.
The questions or the answers or both?
Yeah. I think the
questions
answers
were pretty widely the questions were pretty widely
No,
disseminated.
the answers I
They're all
assume.
online, all of them. Yeah, so
It's pretty much publicly available.
yeah, and we'll compile them for this group, put them all in one place. We can put them on the webpage for this joint committee, but yes, they're all published. All the previous ones that were asked over a series of weeks were compiled and published under one compiled document posted on the website.
I think I probably have them in front.
Okay, so the answers as well were published.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, we have our own documents that may address some of the same issues.
I'm certain you do, which is exactly why I think getting them all together would be a great starting point. I also know that there are probably some additional work that could be done within the parameters of what our staff can actually, our respective staffs can actually handle. That could be done. We, for example, have an ability to make some nominal requests of staff, and that's sort of built into the normal course of things. So there are some things that we could do that, as long as they don't take too much time, could add to the mix of information, formal government issues, things like that. That I think would be beneficial to this committee as well as the public. And I think a good starting point, because I'm also thinking, and I know you'll agree with me on this because you've served as an expert before, but if the best expert in the world wants to come in and at least get the information that an organization that's hiring them already has. I'm in the middle of doing that right now for a client. So I think gathering the information and having it available, because after all, we are uniquely Downers Grove. I tell people all the time, we're uniquely Downers Grove. So I think that whoever it is that is selected to serve that role should understand our community, and not just generic communities. What weight or bearing that may have on the review, I don't know. That's not for me to decide. But I think if we can do both, because I'm thrilled to hear that you already have a candidate in mind, but I'm sure that there'll probably want to be some discussion and understanding of background, who that is, before anyone makes that decision. And I think ultimately we would have to recommend, my understanding is we have zero authority to spend anything. We would have to get we would have to make a recommendation and have that ultimately approved for the actual expenditure. So we can do all the work of getting it there. So it's sort of a parallel track makes sense, and for example, I think we'd all be, we would welcome, I mean, well, I say tell us who the expert is, you just did, but sending that information, contact information, so we can look into it.
Yeah, I think you'd be happy to talk to any of the members of this ad hoc committee.
And one of the reasons why we may seem to be moving very deliberately is because we're moving very deliberately. I want to make sure that everybody understands what we're doing and why we're doing it. And if we go left, there's a reason for it. If we go backwards, there's a reason for it. If we go right, there's a reason for it. So these are all good ideas. I just want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that everyone understands what we're doing and why we're doing it, and that it's fully transparent.
Agreed.
So can we then agree amongst ourselves, and I know they're just sitting right over there, to ask our respective staffs to maybe in the next, and we'll talk about it when our next meeting is. This is not going to be next week. It may not even be 2 weeks from now. To sort of pull together what we're considering to be already available, plus maybe some minor additional information, maybe information about the expert that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does the council have prevalence data about, I mean, we've heard from the community, like, cherry-picked stats about, you know, what other districts or jurisdictions have in terms of their library structure. And I imagine Julie has that, because I think, right, and then the history of that, maybe, like, you know, why did they end up with the structure that they currently have? Because my understanding, particularly school boards, is the trend is actually going in the opposite direction. That it's more common that you're moving from election to appointment than appointment to election.
Well, trend information.
Well, just general trend, market trend, not, I mean, I'm asking specific maybe to local Chicagoland area, greater Chicago region, but I was just making an observation that that's the trend as I understood it, as the law professor communicated to me. But that's the trend on school boards. I don't know if anyone's collected trend information on across the broad US library world, but you know, I'm just making an observation that that might be helpful context. So if you guys don't have it, maybe we should start collecting it, and maybe Julie would be the best person to start collecting.
I have heard that if you want to get information, a good place to go is your library. Sure. I mean, to me, that's a big part of what we should be doing on a early basis, is gathering information.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that we have the numbers, but I don't believe that we have the trends.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the trends, and also at a local level, at sort of more micro level, it's sort of what's the specific context around the current status of each library. There's complicated reasons why each library might have ended up where they currently are. And so, you know, you can cherry pick 4 or 5 examples on either side to say that that is emblematic of what's going on, and we don't follow, you know, we're the outlier, or we're the standard bearer, however you want to think of that. So I think if we have comprehensive data, it will be easier to analyze.
I fully appreciate that, and again, the analogy that I'll draw is to home rule status.
Yeah.
There are communities that have home rule status, there are communities that don't have home rule status. Some of that is governed by statute, but some of it is governed by choice. And if you look at the communities that have home rule status or have lost home rule status, you really have to look at the circumstances surrounding that decision. And you can't just point to who has it and who doesn't and just draw a conclusion from that. So I hear what you're saying.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Good.
I mean, one other thing that I want to mention is I always thought of this as a council manager form of government. So it's one of the things I want more information on, not a commission form of government, and whether that means anything or not.
Yeah.
We are definitely a village
Yeah,
manager form of
Yeah, we're a council manager form of government, not a commission form of government. That may not mean anything, but that's something that at least I was curious as to if it does mean anything. So that's one of the questions that I have. Other pieces of information that we may know of or want to add to the mix, or that are easily retrievable that we want to identify for collection. And then we can talk about when do we want it and what we want to do with it and when we meet next, when we get to that part of the agenda. Well, I have a feeling we're gonna get quite a bit of stuff
I think so, too.
between now and the next meeting. And then that will inform our further inquiries, that's my
Right.
guess.
Yeah,
Sure.
that's what I think as well.
I'm gonna follow your example of working smarter, not harder. The other thing I'd just be curious of is, because I'm sure the individual from Northwestern is outstanding and would probably be the clear choice, but were there any other people who were considered as, you know, if that person was unavailable, would there be somebody else that was identified as a potential expert? I think that would just be interesting to know.
We'll look into it.
We can look into it too. One of the things that I've come to know about this community is we have a lot of people who know a lot of stuff in Downers Grove, and they're not shy about sharing it.
Well, I imagine, you know, I'm sure he has other published research, just kind of look at who he references,
Absolutely.
right, you know?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Not that we are going to necessarily go through a lowest qualified bidder process, but we do have this sort of requirement of at least looking at 2 or 3 different options before making a choice.
Yeah, I think this was, but my understanding, at least from the library's perspective, that this was the fee would be below the amount that would require an RFP.
Sure, understood, but the principle, I think, is still
I
the
get
same.
it, yeah. Totally agree. Government efficiency, I'm all for that.
Okay, I mean, any thoughts on item 3? We've been focused on information about the quality or attributes of elected versus appointed. What can we do to explore number 3, which would be any alternative selection process? And I've even heard of a potential hybrid option that I haven't heard discussed at all, that would blend the benefits of an election with an appointment.
Are there any communities that have a hybrid approach, and how did they get there? Or that would be.
How we pushed it down.
Maybe, although I also remember that when we adopted a stormwater utility, we're the only ones in the entire state.
Downers Grove is unique.
Right, right, just because it hasn't been done before. I don't know if
Apostrophe
that's-
free since 1863.
Do you know why?
No, Pierce Downer was weird.
No. Typesetting costs, government efficiency.
I actually did always wonder.
Past is never passed.
That darn apostrophe cost money back then, so. Out it went. But seriously, all kidding aside, if there are things that would fall under 3, because that's part of our objective, is any other alternative selection process. I mean, I can submit an idea, I can say more about what the hybrid is I have in mind. But if there are others that we know of, and I don't know if it has to be necessarily limited to Illinois, because this is really the what's possible
Well, no, I
piece.
mean, I don't think it has to be.
This is the what's possible piece. I mean, the stormwater utility idea came from outside of Illinois. We run it down Grove, it made sense. We talked about it, and it worked very well. By just one example. And that doesn't mean anybody's gonna think it's a good idea to do it, but I think it would be part of our mission here to explore what's possible. And if there are other options that we haven't considered or haven't received a lot of discussion, I think it's worth identifying. Maybe say, yeah, that's a good idea, but we're not gonna do that. But I think it's part of our mission. And I don't necessarily think we need to identify them right now. I'm not prepared to. I'm also saying that because, again, there's a lot of people in Downers Grove that know a lot of stuff, and they're not shy about sharing it. Anything else with respect to section 3, subpoints 1, 2, and 3?
Nothing for me.
Okay, let's put a pin in that, we may come back to it. One thing that we do need to do is then talk about section 4, which is holding regular meetings to discuss and consider accomplishing the things that we just talked about. I think we had thought initially about having a cadence of roughly every 2 weeks. I don't think anything more than that makes sense, and anything longer risks not moving things forward. But personally, I don't think we need to be absolutely, it's gotta be the every other Thursday or something like that.
Sure.
I will already confess that it occurred to me later on the 27th, which is 2 weeks from today, I will probably be in New York. But I think we can adjust that, because other people have travel, spring break, and I think as long as we announce our meeting sufficiently far in advance, it shouldn't be a problem. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Yes?
yes.
Absolutely, I know that we all, it's a schedule, so.
Okay. Would it make sense then, if we don't have to pull out calendars right now, I think we can do that separately, would it make sense to try to schedule a meeting maybe 3 weeks from now? I also don't want to conflict with your regularly scheduled library board meetings.
Those are on Wednesdays.
Yeah, asking you to meet on a Wednesday and a Thursday back to
Yeah,
back.
I asked you that. I prefer not to do that.
I respect that.
Thank you.
So maybe we can do this offline, but do we want to maybe look at the first week of April?
It's spring break.
Oh,
That is pretty big, yeah. I'm here, but other people probably aren't.
it's that week.
Yeah.
First week of April.
That would be the harder, but yeah.
I'm probably here as well.
I'm here.
I'm
not
here.
going anywhere.
I'm around until mid-April, mid-May.
We can tentatively make
Sure. I mean, that's the other thing, that I think that we have the flexibility to continue our mission, but if we don't need to meet, or if we want to change our meeting date, I don't see why not, as long as we give everyone plenty of notice that we're doing that. Do you want to, let's just tentatively say April 3rd, same time, same place? And that's 1, 2, 3 weeks from now, so that should allow plenty of time to get information. And so this is the question I have for the really smart people in the room. Having information coming from multiple places, consolidating it in one location for review by this committee by, say, end of the week before, maybe even the Monday of that week, is that something that's feasible, and what do we think about the mechanism by which to accomplish that?
Alright, so let's first make sure we have an understanding of what was asked of us, so if you don't mind, I'll run down that and make sure we have it all. One, just a reposting of the existing council questions and responses that were produced over the couple-week period at the end of last year. Two, research on the structure and formats of libraries in the Chicago area, including some history, context, and trends. Three, a commentary on form of government and how it relates to the questions at hand. Four, information on the expert talked about tonight and any other information on other potential experts or other expert materials already published. And five, any commentary or research on a hybrid approach of appointed elected processes.
That last one I have to explain to you what that is first, but
I was hoping there'd be a little more on that. But so far, that's what we have in terms of a request for information. I want to check with Enza and Julie, make sure that's what we're all doing.
I do just want to comment on the information on the structure of and trends in libraries tend to be statewide rather than just focused on the Chicago area, because a lot of that data comes from the Illinois State Library.
And I would add to that list if there's anything that the library has on this topic that would be helpful. And I know there's a lot more opportunities for information, such as, and we're not even getting to some of the details yet, but we have to follow the funnel system. But if there's any other sort of general research or that's been done either in connection with this discussion for the last several months or otherwise, that would be useful. I would include that. I don't know what it is, so I can't specify it, but if there is such a thing, I think that would be very helpful too. Please.
So we'll add 6, any other research in general available on top of it.
That we basically that we already have, and then I think just fair warning, Commissioner Stosky, if you get, I may have some questions may pose to you between now and then, but.
That's the typical process.
Yeah, well, we have our own processes to ask questions, so we may do that.
Okay, so
we'll see the results of it.
So the idea would be then to, next meeting would be on a Wednesday, April 3rd, and the idea would be.
Thursday.
Thursday. Okay. I think I don't want to read this calendar, but I'm sorry about that, Thursday, April 3rd. And to have it published, the information published by the preceding Monday.
I think that's right. If there are issues with the format or what it looks like, we can discuss them, but I don't anticipate there being any issues. Does that make sense? Is that feasible?
So we do have one scheduling thing to throw out there. One of my valued teammates, coworkers, is unavailable on that day.
It is spring break. But we can certainly proceed and there's plenty of information that's not needed.
We'll save all the legal stuff for later. Okay, and I realize that's not ideal, but no date is ever ideal, and we do want to keep things moving.
But tentatively, April
Yes.
Just in case, just
Oh,
throwing it
yes,
out
of
there,
course. Yes.
just saying, just in case.
I mean, for example, if there's more information coming that for whatever reason we're able to get, it's really important, we can always
Yeah.
adjust.
Yeah, we'll keep everybody informed if there are any issues gathering the information that's been requested.
Okay. Before we go on to the next item on our agenda, which is, well, we've already kind of covered 5, 6, 7. We are in 8 regarding future meetings. The other thing I want to bring up is establishing what the quorum is for this ad hoc joint committee. Given our size and our nature, it's been suggested it should be 4, which would mean that we can't meet unless we're all here. But I don't see a problem with that. I don't think we're planning a meeting unless we're all 4 of us are here anyway.
Yes, that's correct.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
It does. I know the 2 of us have particular schedules, so I can communicate that to you. Like books, I'm not changing that.
We're not asking you to.
Absolutely not.
At most, I would insist on coming with you.
All right. Well,
Your family might object to that.
swim in the Mediterranean together.
Sounds like a good book. So formally, I think we need to make a motion for that. So can I have a motion to adopt a quorum of 4 for this joint ad hoc committee?
Yes, Chair, I move to establish a quorum for the joint ad hoc committee of the Downers Grove Village Council and the Downers Grove Library Board of Trustees as 4 members.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion. Can I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Sadowski-Bugan.
Aye.
Trustee Kuntia.
Aye.
Commissioner Tully.
Aye.
Trustee Williams.
All right, we are officially, thank you, we are officially a quorum of 4. Any other administrative issues that we should address while we're on this agenda item? Okay. Then we're going to move to item 9, which is public comment. And before we go to public comment, first of all, thank you for being here. Really appreciate you coming out on another night. I see a lot of familiar faces, so it's good to see you again. This joint ad hoc committee obviously has a very narrow focus, so my only ask, polite ask, would be to keep public comments to the very narrow focus of this joint ad hoc subcommittee. Certainly if people have comments or questions or recipes or whatever they want to share with the Library Board of Trustees, I recommend you go to their meeting, and if you have things you want to share with the Downers Grove Village Council, I suggest you share those at their meetings. But if there's any
I wish
public,
people shared recipes.
I got it.
I'll be happy to. I'm going to bring one to this next meeting. So with that, if there's any members of the public that have any public comments they would like to make within our small little box, please and welcome to the podium.
Good evening, Kylie Spahn, Downers Grove resident. This committee is tasked with the responsibility of investigating the viability of an elected library board. This committee was created as a result of the mayor and 3 village council members wanting to place a non-binding referendum question on the ballot for an elected library board. In order for this committee to be legitimate and to act in good faith, 2 things need to happen. Hire experts to fully analyse, vet and disclose not just financial implications of an elected library board, but also investigate the historical deed conditions of land use, and to be fully transparent. It is imperative that the committee hire experts. Let me explain. The Downers Grove Public Library is built on 6 parcels of land. 3 parcels are owned by the Downers Grove Public Library, 3 parcels are owned by the village of Downers Grove. With the passing of the village's bond referendum to expand the library in 1996, the library and village entered into a land lease agreement. This 1997 lease agreement allowed the library to build an expansion onto those village-owned parcels. The lease agreement states in section 12C that this lease, and I quote, "This lease agreement may not be assigned to either party in whole or in part without the prior written consent of the other. This shall include, but is not limited to, any assignment to a successor local library district. Any assignment or transfer without such written consent shall at the option of the other party be deemed to be void and of no effect, end quote. In the event that this lease agreement is terminated, Section 10 states that, quote, the library shall, without expense to the village, and within such a time as the village may reasonably require, remove said expanded library facility located on the expansion site lease area and restore the expansion site lease area to a landscaped green space condition reasonably satisfactory to the village, end quote. This lease can be renegotiated. A legal expert specialising in land lease agreements must be consulted and a price tag fixed to renegotiating the land lease and a bridge lease in the event that an elected library board happens. The committee should also hire an archivist who specialises in land deeds, especially when estate gifts are involved. This person will need to start with the Moshel subdivision of 1914. The land was purchased in part with funds acquired through the bequeathment of John Oldfield's estate, which stipulated that those funds were to be used to purchase land for a Downers Grove Public Library in perpetuity. You will need to hire an archivist to go through the land deeds and the conditions and purposes attached to the deeds. This information then needs to be reviewed by legal counsel and a price tag attached to it as it relates to an elected library board. A financial consultant should be retained to assess the costs of creating a new tax district, what the impact on property taxes would be, and the impact on the library's financial stability moving forward. A hybrid library board, as explained by the Mayor, would involve the library board becoming an elected board, but still remain under the village's control for revenue and budget approval. With either scenario, the financial consultant needs to look at all the shared services between the village and the library and report on the associated cost increases if the library was to become an elected board. For example, in 1993, during the fake petitioners scandal, when a group of book banners tried to petition the village council to place a referendum on the ballot for an elected library board, it was reported in the Chicago Tribune that the tax rate would drop from 19 cents per $100 assessed property value to 15 cents, thus reducing the library's income substantially. Additionally, then Library Board President, Mr. Christopher Bowen, stated that the library would lose its electricity service agreement through the village, amounting to $81,000 a year, as well as assistance from the village staff and tax revenue for a total of $400,000 per year. Mr. Bowen stated, and I quote, "Such a development would destroy the library," end quote. These figures are 30 years old. And I would like to know what this price tag is today, especially with the expansion of our library and the 30-year impact of inflation. A financial consultant is absolutely necessary. Now I would like to talk about transparency. In order for this committee to be legitimate, it must be transparent. I can offer an example. At a village council meeting in December, it was stated that the community wanted an elected library board. I submitted a FOIA for all emails and e-comments regarding the proposed referendum. I received a 265-page document that contained letters to the village council from November 1st to December 19th, 2024. In those 265 pages, one was the request by a commissioner to place the referendum question on the agenda. 3 letters were from residents in support of an elected board, and the overwhelming majority were in favour of leaving our library board as is. A great disservice was done by members of the village council claiming they had support for an elected board when it was clear that they did not. Finally, I would like to address the budget for this commission. The proposed referendum is an initiative of the village council. The library board was not privy to this proposal and never requested such a change as required by state law. The library's budget is approved by the village council. In the current budget, there is no allocation for funding this committee. To my knowledge, the library has never gone over budget during the 20 years that I have been a resident. In requiring the library to share this cost, what library services would be cut and would the library be forced to go over budget? It is my opinion that the village should be financially responsible for hiring all legal, financial and archive experts. This is a village-pushed agenda and therefore the village should be responsible for all expenses. This committee owes it to the residents of Downers Grove to leave no stone unturned and to report the facts and data so that voters can make an educated decision should this referendum question go on the ballot in 2026. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, appreciate your comments. Just a couple things real quick. I think we have pretty much decided that the financial lift will be by the village. That last point, I think there's general agreement that the village should pick up that. One of the things we are trying to do is, as you can tell, is minimize the cost generally, but yet do a responsible job. Something I call proportionality. I wouldn't leave no stone unturned, but I think we need to do enough work so that people feel like there's been a very fair investigation. The only other thing is that on letters and emails, do appreciate that there's some people that don't communicate by email or letters. There's also a lot of conversations that we have with people. You wouldn't find those in a FOIA request. I'm not saying one way or the other, just recognize that generally there are people that communicate in many different ways. Not all of them are emails and letters. Some people like to communicate through DMs on social media platforms, I've heard. Some people like to go to the library and check out hard copies and everything in between. And the land use issue, that was a fascinating history. Thank you for sharing it. I'm actually, I think we've been asking some questions about it. I'd like to know more about it. Not quite sure how it impacts our work, but I certainly think it's something that needs to be addressed at some point. So thank you for sharing that. Other questions from the public? Good evening, welcome.
Hi, I'm Paul, Downers Grove resident, familiar face as you said. A couple of points. One is, I understand that the purpose of this ad hoc committee is to gather data, not to make recommendations, not to make decisions. So I understand that that could lead to saying, well, we don't really need to address the issue of trying to find the problem that we're trying to solve here. But in Alice in Wonderland, Alice was through the rabbit hole and she was lost and she came across the Cheshire Cat and she said, I'm lost, which way do I go? What road should I take? And the Cheshire Cat said, well, where are you going? She said, I don't really know. And he said, well, if you don't know where you're going, any road will do. So if you're gonna be gathering information, I think it's helpful to know where you're going with this because that will be more efficient. There's lots of different things you can research in terms of history, legal, costs, all kinds of different factors. I think having a clear sense of what problem you're trying to solve gives you focus, which helps you work faster, more efficiently, and get to the point. That would then lead into some of this discussion about the bringing in some experts. One of the things that experts can do if you're in a new area and you're really trying to figure out where things are, one of the things that an expert can do is actually help frame the problem and help frame what your options are. If it turns out they say there are 5 different options and you can easily eliminate 3 of them because of conditions that are unique to Downers Grove, then that helps you get along. So I think having an expert in something as new as this would be a great benefit to the committee's work. And then the final point is one of the things that I think is relevant to this that, again, this is early discussions here, first meeting of this committee, so you haven't really gone into the depths of these yet, but I think one of the relevant points here or that I would say for whatever the results would be something that would help to protect and defend the integrity of the library. It doesn't seem to get talked about a lot, but there have been people that have made a concerted effort to try to undermine the library. I'm glad to see that everybody up here is very supportive of it. Chairman Tully, you yourself said that you wish they could get 6 stars for the library, so I very much appreciate that sentiment, and I think that would be good in the selection process to say, whatever the selection process is, we want to make sure we get the right kind of people that will further that sort of sentiment and help promote the library and make it even stronger. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and I do appreciate that there are many of us that may have been thinking about this for 6, 7, 8, 9 months and have some very strong views that there really are only these options or that options. One of the things I think we as a committee are trying to be cognizant of is there's a broader group that may not be as familiar with some of the issues or the options as everyone else. So we want to at least make sure that we point out that there are other roads, even though they may be very rocky or they may be too steep or they may be washed out, because I think we owe it to the community to show that we started out broad and then got narrow instead of just going right to the chase. It's a skill set that I was just reading a book about this, about not, when someone asks you a question, don't be too quick to give them the answer. Listen as to what they're really trying to find out, what they're really trying to get at before you give them, and that's how you end up becoming more of a trusted advisor in terms of that. So I think that's just at least my 2 cents. Some of it I think may appear to be as, well, why are they even talking about this? It's because we want to be able to say that whatever we've done, we have addressed the different areas, and then if things are ruled out, they're ruled out, but at least folks know that they were considered. So that might seem things start a little bit more broadly than they will end up. But point well taken. Thank you. Other questions, comments from members of the public on our very narrow mission? Welcome, good evening.
Laura Kamdelsky, Downers Grove resident. I just wondered how the experts' report or opinions or, scope of the whole issue and their thoughts will be shared, probably in a report form that everyone can read. Just curious about that process. I assume they could even come to a meeting. I haven't seen that kind of thing play out because I haven't been attending as many, committees or council meetings where that has happened, so I'd just be curious about what you think at this moment about expert testimony.
I will let my colleagues speak for themselves. I think that having somebody come and testify is probably premature at this point. I think getting some studies or articles would be probably the most effective, and clearly if we bring something in that is an article or a study that an academic or someone else who's an expert in this field has submitted to us, it will be publicly available.
Yeah, I agree. I think we'd have to define the scope of work with that individual and get a retainer agreement. So there would be some negotiation back and forth before we even understood how it was going to interact with the public.
Yes, well, I would imagine that any expert that engages on behalf of an entity that is subject to the Freedom of Information Act should be fair warned that whatever they submit to us will be publicly available. Good evening, welcome.
Bruce Mabey, Downers Grove. I love that the doors appear to be opening here, that it's being from the beginning looked at as they're not just two alternatives. That is something I'd like to build upon, because I think there are not just a limited number of alternatives of how do we choose this. What are the criteria of the either and the or? There's I think a hidden objective that I don't see here anywhere, and that is public engagement and dialogue about the whole thing. And I think you talked about it earlier, Commissioner Tully, that if the public can begin to dialogue, get engaged, not just give input, but not just polarize. We have plenty of that at the global level, at the national level. If there are ways here, we can keep it from becoming, or keep it from continuing to be, I'm on this side and I'm on this side, but there's nothing else going on. If we keep that up, I don't think we're making the real advancement that this is an opportunity to do. So the third objective that I might propose as being quietly discussed, alternative processes of public engagement. Not just alternative processes of, elect or appoint, but how the public might be pulled into dialogue about this as well as input. I look at the situation here as this is not about just this simple choice. This is something that for Downers Grove is an opportunity, I say, to shine way beyond this simple decision. And it is the idea of getting public engagement, public dialogue, and there are ways to do that. Some experts will bring that, some will just talk about library stuff, but there are ways of getting people to actually not only hear each other's point of view, but start to learn from each other as we're all, as you pointed out in the beginning, learning about how this not only does work in other places, but how it can work here, how we might innovate something by learning from what others are doing, but maybe making our own little mix and trying that out a little differently. Anyway, fundamental point, I love the idea of alternatives, and I hope the alternatives begin to include how the process is done, not just what processes. Thanks.
Thank you, appreciate it. We will definitely emphasize that there is a number 3, any other alternative selection process, because I think it does open that door to exploring what's possible. Any other questions or comments from members of the audience? I will thank you very much for coming out tonight. I don't think we missed anything, have we? That then we'll obviously publish our next meeting date well in advance of that next meeting. We'll make sure that you know. If for some reason we can't get it to you, Nathan will come to your house and personally invite you. As long as he's not in the Mediterranean. In that case, may I please have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much. Have a good night.